Hello there and welcome to this video on the Daystate Wolverine. In this video we're going to be taking the bear block and individual components and reassembling them into a completely functional rifle. We'll talk through the reassembly and we'll also give you any information you need as we walk through the process. And on your screen now you should see a complete list of all the tools that we're going to use to complete this job. The only other thing that I want to mention is that this rifle here has had all the seals replaced off camera. We've done that simply to save us a little bit of time. Although Daystate themselves do supply a full O-ring kit for the Daystate Wolverine and for all other Daystate rifles for that matter. So if you need a seal or a seal kit, please contact Daystate direct either via their website or their technical support Facebook page. With that all said and done, we can begin on the reassembly. The first thing we're going to do is reinstall the valve and the indexing pin system. The first thing we'll do is just add a small amount of silicone grease to the 3 O-rings in the valve body. 2 on the outside and 1 in the back there. Just a small amount will do us. Then we'll take our block and install the valve like so. We see this hole here is orientated towards this part of the block. There we have it like that. Next thing we'll do is install the valve pin. That simply goes together like this. So we have the valve pin and a little small cup at the bottom. They go together like that. Then we'll place the small O-ring on the base of the shaft there, adding a small amount of silicone grease to that before that goes in. Get that situated like so. If the cup doesn't want to go in, all we need to do is flip the rifle over, install the small grub screw in the bottom there, give it a little wiggle, and that will allow the cup to go down into its correct position. There we have it. With that done, we can reinstall the cover plate and the small spring. So the spring just drops over the valve pin like so, and then the cover pushes on over the top. We can get the screws installed and then done up using a 2mm Allen key. As you do that up, just make sure the plate stays nice and flush with the block. If it's at all raised, you may have trouble inserting your magazine. With that done, we can take a 3mm Allen key, snug up this grub screw in the base here, like so, and then install our stock bolt nut. Getting that done up nice and tightly with an 11mm spanner. Next up, we'll get the pellet probe and the cocking arm installed into the rifle. The first thing we need to do is decide which side we want the cocking arm to be on. It can be put on the right or the left hand side. Once we've made our decision, we simply need to install this small cover piece in the opposite side to that. Like so. With that done, we can come through the back and just tighten up the 2 screws using a 2mm Allen key. Next up, we'll take the small spring and the ball bearing here and add a small amount of moly grease to both these pieces. I'm using moly grease on my rifle, but you could as well use lithium grease if you didn't have access to moly grease. With that put on, we'll get the spring installed, and that just fits into the small cutout in the side of the pellet probe. Like so, and then we can drop the ball bearing over the top. With that done, we can take our pellet probe and whilst orientating the arm, so the arm has a small bend in it, the bend needs to be pointed forwards. So, get that put in. Bit tricky to do for the camera to be honest, but there we have it. So with the arm, we can push the arm in, so we're compressing the small spring and the ball bearing. Then we can add our small screw onto the top. Before that goes in though, I am just going to add a small amount of moly grease to the hole, just so it's nice and lubricated as it goes in. Then we can do that up using a flat bladed screwdriver. If you're having trouble getting the screw started, just make sure that you're pushing the arm enough for the screw to drop all the way through. With that done, we'll take our pellet probe and just add a small amount of moly grease to it. Again, I'm using moly, although you could use lithium grease as well. With that done, we'll take our block and get the pellet probe pushed through the back. Like so. At this stage, we'll pull the pellet probe back slightly and just add a small amount of moly grease to both the top and the bottom of the cocking arm. Next up, we'll bring back this small bush here, and again, just add a small amount of moly grease to it. Get that installed into the pellet, or the cocking arm I should say, and then get the whole assembly pushed forward. From the top here, we just need to line up a screw hole in the back. Once the hole's lined up, we can take our cocking arm screw and get that installed in the back. The final thing we'll do is add our small cocking dog. It's simply done taking this screw here, using a 2.5mm Allen key and getting the screw installed into the pellet probe. And hopefully you can see that in there, but the cocking dog is in the front of the pellet probe. Next up, we'll reassemble the hammer. Now, like I said in the disassembly video, there's likely no reason that you'll ever need to take apart your hammer, although we did so just so you could see what's going on. With that said though, we can start the reassembly process. The first thing we'll do is take this brass piece here and add the small spring to the back of it. Next up, we'll take the hammer weight itself, put that in the Delrin housing with the grub screw hole, this part here, facing towards the front. Get that pushed in, and then align the hole or the threads in the side with this hole in the side of the hammer. Next thing we'll do is take a M4 bolt, any M4 bolt will do, and get that screwed into the side. Next thing we'll do is take some medium strength blue Loctite and just add that to the threads here. The blue Loctite is just to stop the hammer spring assembly coming undone when it's in the rifle. Although once it's applied, we can take the hammer assembly and get this screwed into the back here. Doing that up nice and tight using a flat bladed screwdriver. As you do that up, just make sure that you hold tight the actual M4 bolt here so that it doesn't try and rotate on you and damage the hammer housing, this little Delrin piece here. With that done, we'll get the striker face of the hammer installed, which is this piece here. Now this is just a grub screw and it does have a hex key in the back here. That hex key needs to be facing towards the brass section of the hammer, so like this in the rifle. We'll get that screwed into the front here. Get the first bit done by hand, and just loosen the bolt in the side if you feel the actual grub screw itself contacting with the M4 bolt. You can come in the back using a 3mm Allen key, and whilst turning the screw counterclockwise, so undoing it in effect, we'll wind the striking face in. We're just going to undo this until it stops, so about there, which is about 5mm from the face of the hammer. Next thing we'll do is remove the M4 bolt from the side and then replace it with this small locking screw here. So this is just a small M4 grub screw that screws into the side of the hammer. With it all put together, I will just give you a very brief explanation of how this hammer system works. So the hammer is situated in the rifle like so. When we cock it, it pulls it back and latches it on the trigger sear. As we pull the trigger sear lets go and allows the hammer to fly forward under the pressure of the hammer spring. When installed into the rifle, as the hammer flies forward, this Delrin outer housing hits the inside of the block and allows the actual hammer weight, the part in the middle here, to fly forward. Now the grub screw that we installed in the centre of the hammer is the striking face of the hammer. So as that flies forward, it hits the valve and then allows us to take a shot. Now the advantage of this slingshot system is that it's incredibly efficient, and this system here is the main reason that the Wolverine is able to get so many shots. With that said though, we can get that installed into the actual body of the rifle. So we'll rotate the hammer until we locate this screw in the side, and line that up with this slot in the side of the block. Get that pushed in, and then by the use of a razor blade we'll just gently pick up this sticker here, gently peel that back, and then line up the hole in the side with the slot, like so. Then using a 2.5mm Allen key we'll get the screw installed in the side of the hammer. The actual hammer itself is Delrin, so be careful not to over tighten the screw as you may strip the threads. With that all done though, we can reattach the sticker, and there is the hammer captive within the rifle. Next up, we'll reinstall the hammer spring and the safety into the rifle. Before we do that though, I do just very briefly want to mention that this is a UK spec sub 12 rifle, and from the factory it was fitted with an anti-tamper bar through this hole here. So it's banged in from the side in this hole here, and it blocks our access off to the power adjustment of the rifle. Now to remove that, all I needed to do was use a 2mm pin punch the bar out, and that allowed me access to the power adjustment of the rifle. Although FAC models and export models are not fitted with this feature. With that said though, we can continue on with the build. The first thing we'll do is take this 5mm ball bearing here and add a small amount of moly grease to the outside of the ball bearing. Just a small amount will do us. So there we have it there. Then via the use of some tweezers, we'll get this installed into the back of the block. Now if we take a look at the back of the block here, we have this screw at the back, which is our cocking arm retaining screw. The hole just behind that is where the ball bearing needs to go. So hopefully you can see that for the camera, but it's in this hole here. Next up, we'll take the small spring and the ball bearing here and just add a small amount of moly grease to both of these items. And with a small amount of grease applied to both of these items, we'll take our safety, add the ball bearing first to this hole here, and then the spring over the top of it. Here we have it there. Next, we'll take our hammer spring, and whilst aligning the guide at the front here towards the front of the rifle, so up against the back of the hammer, we'll get that gently placed in the back, like so. Next up, by being nice and careful not to lose either of the springs or the ball bearings, we'll take the safety here, put that on the hammer spring like so, and then gently get that pushed in. At this stage here, we just need to nudge this bar in order for it to go in the back, and then we'll do the same to this small spring here. And there we have it. Once you get it pushed into position, the safety bar will click into place, and the actual safety body won't be able to come out the back of the rifle again until you pull the safety bar down. Next, we're going to get the screws installed. So whilst pushing the safety body in, we're going to come in the side and add our safety screw, and this on this side is just simply a 2mm Allen key. As this is a UK spec rifle, as I mentioned earlier, on the other side we have this 3-pin anti-tamper screw. So this isn't fitted to FAC or export models, but to get that reinstalled we're going to take our 3-pin anti-tamper tool, get the screw installed onto the head of the tool there, and then get that screwed into the back. Getting that done up nice and tight. Next thing we'll do is get the trigger reinstalled into the rifle. The first thing we'll do is add the outer plastic housing to the trigger body itself. It's simply done by sliding the body over, then reinstalling the 2 screws, one in either side, and getting those done up using a flat-bladed screwdriver. With that done, the next thing we'll do is flip the block on its side, like so, and we'll take our trigger, take our small trigger return spring, and the trigger return spring hooks over this spring here. Next thing we'll do is line the safety, this pin here, up with this hole here, so the second hole in. There we have it. Next thing we'll do is take our 4 retaining screws and get these lightly installed. These just need to be touching the housing for now. We'll do them up tight very shortly. With all 4 screws installed nice and loosely, so you can see the actual trigger housing itself is still loose, we'll put some pressure on the trigger housing and then cock the rifle. You'll hear a loud click, and whilst pushing the trigger assembly down, we'll do these 4 screws up nice and tight. At this stage we can close the pellet probe and then fire the rifle. Next thing we'll do is rebuild the regulator. So like I said earlier, all the O-rings have been replaced off camera to save us a little bit of time, so we can go ahead and just rebuild the regulator. The first thing we'll do is take the reg piston itself, add a small amount of silicone grease to both the top and the bottom O-ring, and whilst we're here I will also show you the Belleville stack. So the Bellevilles are cupped in pairs. There's 3 pairs and they're cupped 2 one way, 2 the other way, and then the last 2 are cupped facing towards the end of the piston. So with that said, we'll get the piston installed into the body nice and carefully, pushing that all the way home. Up next we'll take our white sealing puck, this little piece here, and get that dropped into the top of the housing here. There we have it. Make sure it's laying nice and flat. Then we'll take our adjuster screw, again add a small amount of silicone grease to the outside O-ring, wiping off the excess with our fingers. Then we can get that installed into the top of the body. Getting that done up using a flat bladed screwdriver. At this stage here, we're going to reset the distance between the top of the adjuster screw and the top of the housing. So I measured mine before we took it apart, so I'm just going to reset it. And after a little bit of measuring, I'm happy to say that the regulator is set to roughly where it was before we took it apart. So this will mean that when we install the regulator into the rifle, it should be roughly set where it was. The last thing we'll do with the regulator is get the back cap installed, and that just simply screws over the front there. And before we screw that up, we'll just add a small amount of silicone grease to the O-ring inside the cap. And with the cap screwed on, we'll get a set of parrot grips, lightly grip the outside of the reg housing, then using a 22mm spanner, just get the reg snugged up. So there that is there. The last thing we can do is add a small amount of silicone grease to both of these O-rings here, the 2 on the outside of the regulator, and then bring back our front block and get the regulator installed into it. And then getting that snugged down with our set of parrot grips. Next up we can go ahead and add all the other parts to the front block. We'll start off with the one-way valve, so we'll take our block, take the small brass cup and drop that into the hole like so. And use a set of tweezers just to make sure it's nice and seated. Then we'll take our one-way valve, so the Foster fitting and the one-way valve, add a small amount of silicone grease to this urethane O-ring here. Get that installed into the back there. And I have already installed the small Doughty washer onto the face there. Then we can go ahead and just get that screwed into the bottom of the front block. Getting that done up nice and tight with a 5/8 ring spanner. Next up we'll reinstall the valve spring housing. So first thing to go in is this little plug here. The plug itself may not be fitted to FAC models, although this is a sub 12 rifle, so we're installing it here. And then to get that nice and tight, we're using a shaft of some description, putting it through the hole there and just snugging it up. Next thing we'll do is go ahead and add the 2 gauges. Now these gauges both have Doughty washers on the back of them, and they are labelled both Daystate and Humour. So the Daystate gauge is going to go in this front hole here, and this denotes bottle pressure. And we're going to get that done up nice and tight by the use of a 22mm spanner. The one labelled Humour is going to go in this second hole here, and this one denotes reg pressure. Again, getting that one done up with a 22mm spanner. Next up, we'll get the valve assembly reinstalled into the rifle, and we'll also get the two halves of the block joined together. First thing we'll do is take our valve seat here and add a small amount of silicone grease to this outside O-ring. Now the valve does have, or the valve seat I should say, does have an orientation within the block. The counterboard side faces up and the flat side faces down towards the actual brass valve itself. So we'll drop it in there and get it situated where it needs to be. So there we have it. We'll take our valve pin and drop that into the centre of the hole. Then get that pushed in through the O-ring. Next up, we'll take this plug here, and with this side facing down, so this side has a number of counterbores on it that needs to be facing up. We'll get that pushed in like so. Then we'll take the valve spring, so this piece here, and get that pushed over the valve. Now FAC models and export models may not have this little Delrin plug. Next up, we'll add a small amount of silicone grease to these two O-rings here. Just a small amount will do us. Then we'll get the two halves of the block joined together. So, nice and careful, and then carefully pushing the two blocks together. We can then take these two long screws here, get them installed in the front like so, and started by hand. And then we can add the two shorter screws, so we have one standard screw and one anti-tamper screw, and get them installed in the back here. Next we can take a 4mm Allen key and just get all the bolts done up nice and tight. And then the anti-tamper screw can be just done up using our anti-tamper tool. Get that placed into the side there, then just snug that up. With that done, we can get our bottle reinstalled onto the front of the rifle. The first thing we're going to do is take this O-ring here and just add a small amount of silicone grease to it. Place that over the threads like so, then get our bottle screwed on. There we have the block of the rifle pretty much fully complete. The next thing we'll do is bring back the barrel and get the shroud installed. And here we have the components for the barrel and the shroud. The first thing we'll do is take our barrel and install the rear boss of the shroud. So we'll locate these two dimples on the barrel, then align those two dimples with the two grub screws in the boss. And we'll get the grub screws done up using a 2mm Allen key. Next up, we'll do the same for the front. So we have this front boss here. We'll align the grub screws with the grub screw dimples and then get those installed. And that's again done using a 2mm Allen key. With that done, we can take our shroud and just slide it over the two bosses and then screw it into the back here. Next, we can bring back over our block and get the barrel installed into the block. It's done by locating the two grub screw dimples on the top of the barrel and getting those aligned with the two grub screws in the top of the block. We remove one of the grub screws in the top of the block. We can make sure that we're aligned where we need to be, so that looks pretty good to me. Then we can do up the two grub screws using a 2.5mm Allen key. And there we have it. There's the rifle pretty much fully complete. What we'll do now is repressurize the rifle, then check it for any leaks. The way we do that is by filling to a certain pressure, say 150 bar, then leaving the rifle for a few hours. Then we recheck the gauge and see if the rifle has lost any pressure. Right then, so I'll get that done off camera, then we'll show you how to set the power. Right then, so we've filled the rifle up and left it about 5 or 6 hours, and as you can see on the gauge on the side there, it's not moved from our mark. This means that the rifle is leak-free, and it's all been put back together successfully. With that said, the last thing we'll do before we put the action back in the stock is reset the power. To do that, we're going to need a 2mm Allen key and a 3mm Allen key. The 3mm one needs to be a nice long one. So first things first, we'll put the rifle on safe. So this is safe, this is fire, so we'll flick it on safe. Then take our 3mm Allen key and poke that through this hole here. Again, as I said earlier, this is a sub 12 rifle, but we have removed the anti-tamper bar from the back of the safety. We'll get the Allen key installed and you'll feel it hit the back of the hammer. At this point, we can rotate the hammer, so if we look in this well here, that little grub screw needs to be exposed and orientated towards the bottom. Then we'll take our 2mm grub screw, or 2mm Allen key I should say, and loosen the locking screw. Once it's loose, we can adjust the power. Now with the 3mm Allen key, screwing in increases the power and screwing out decreases the power. So what we'd do is we'd make an adjustment, lock it off using the 2mm Allen key, then fire the rifle over the chronograph again and readjust as necessary. I've already set the power of this rifle. It's running about 11.5 foot-pounds using JSB 844 pellets. And now we'll get the rifle reinstalled into the stock. And here we have the Wolverine stock, so to get the action in, we simply grip the action, feed it in from the back. You may need to tilt it up slightly to get the trigger guard through the hole in the stock. Then we can just push it down into place. With that done, we can install the stock bolt in the bottom and get that done up using a 5mm Allen key. And there we have it. There is the rifle fully built up and ready to shoot. So that's going to about do it for this video. I hope it's been useful. Thank you for watching and we'll see you in the next one.